Hi, this is Paul on the plane, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of Faking Space, our forensic image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. The second half of Faking Space Season 2 here will focus solely on the Apollo lunar missions, Apollo 11 through 17. The NASA Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995. In 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-resolution images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. What you are about to see is the result of more than 10,000 hours of research poring over every photo, every video, every mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his findings with us all. Before we begin, if you already questioned whether the moon landings actually took place, this and the subsequent videos will be the nail in the coffin. If, however, you believe the moon missions did take place, just like we've all been told, this video series is going to significantly shake your confidence in that belief. Mr. Henderson has created plates of photos and diagrams and included his commentary to go along with each, which I will read. So let's begin. We'll start with one of the most, if not the most, damaging evidence that the moon missions were not shot on the moon, but right here on Earth. This is a close-up of the Apollo 17 flag. We've all been told that there's no atmosphere on the moon, and therefore there could not be any moisture, right? Then why is the flag wet? You can see it is drying from the edges in. Additional photos in this series will reveal other areas of moisture and even standing water. The Apollo 11 LEM is on the left side, and the Apollo 15 version on the right. The helium tank has been removed, not repositioned, to accommodate the rover on the descent stage of the LEM. The helium tank was used to pressurize the fuel to deliver it to the descent engine. Without the helium tank, the engine will not run. And any change in equipment would require the entire machine to be rebalanced as well. A display model or prop for a stage set can easily be modified to fit the needs of the filming being done. Further, there is no evidence that the engine has been fired in any of the videos or pictures. The lack of visible exhaust or heat waves, crater, or scorching the paint on the exhaust bell housing, as well as the lack of moon dirt on the footpads, is the same for all 6 of the missions. And where the descent stage has a helium tank or not, makes no difference. Where the engine is capable of running or not, makes no difference. Apollo 16 Cuff Checklist. The checklists are prepared months before launch. However, the information contained in them is impossible for NASA to know in advance. How could NASA know the size, shape, exact location of a rock, exact time the astronauts would arrive at it, the camera settings, position of the sun, where the footprints and the disturbed area would be located? How could NASA know the mineral composition of the inside of a rock before it is split open? On the lower left, ALSEP photos taken, past tense. The checklists are storyboards and cue cards used for filming the scenes. The astronauts, when wearing the suits, could not hear instructions from the film crew, and the helmets would restrict their vision, so the cuff checklists were used in Apollo 12 to 17. Apollo 11 did not have these lists. Apollo 17 checklist contains impossible details, locating 4 craters to drive through and around. This is a very well staged scene. One astronaut operating 2 cameras and taking photos at the same time. Jones is the inspector for the filming, and his location of where he is standing is clearly marked. So what is he doing on the moon? Well, they had to make sure Jones wasn't in the shot. It's a director's note. Jones was the inspector of the simulation video shot weeks before takeoff, and this is the same video that NASA claims was taken on the moon. This is the plate at the start of the video showing the date it was shot, November 28th, 1972, and of course Jones was never a crew member. Note the dates of the Apollo 17 mission, however. December 7 through 1972. But the video was shot November 28th of them on the moon, more than a week earlier. In our next video, Mr. Henderson shows evidence that the Apollo 15 LEM was dropped during the videoing of its landing and damaged significantly. We'll cover the repairs required before the astronauts could be filmed next to the LEM. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching.
P64, okay? 3. 33. 25. 2. 7% fuel. 20 at 1. 15 at 1. Minus 1. Minus 1. 6% fuel. 10 feet minus 1. 8 feet minus 1. Contact. Man.
Hi, this is Paul on the Plane, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of Faking Space, our image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. We continue with the second half of our Faking Space series, Season 2, here that is focusing solely on the Apollo lunar missions, Apollo 11 through 17. The NASA Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995. In 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-resolution images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. What you're experiencing here in Season 2 comes as a result of more than 10,000 hours of research, poring over every photo, every video, every mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his findings with us all. Here again is a close-up of the Apollo 17 flag, drying from the edges in. What you'll begin to see as you make your way through these Apollo videos is evidence of how the equipment and props were recycled mission after mission on that set and shot over a period of time that resulted in their obvious aging, weathering, and breaking down of many items. So let's continue. The Apollo 15 LEM was dropped during the videoing of its landing and damaged significantly. I've slowed down the video here so you can see the damage the LEM suffers because of this stage mishap. Two damaged PLSs lie on the ground, but only 2 were supplied for the mission, according to NASA. So by simple deduction here, the astronaut taking the picture undoubtedly must have one on, and the astronaut in the background must also have one on. So in actuality, I guess there were 4 on Apollo 15. The main strut is not centered on the landing pad as a result of the crash landing, and you can see the ball joint has been broken. Secondary struts were broken off. The ball swivel joints had to be replaced. photographs could not be taken outside of the LEM until the damage was repaired. To avoid this, an SEVA and 2 EVAs were done before the flag and photos around the LEM were shown. There were no shots or video of the first steps of the Apollo 15 astronauts on the lunar surface. The photos here are almost shot at the same angle, showing the damage to the exhaust housing that happened as a result of the crash of Apollo 15 on the left. However, the photo on the right is from Apollo 17. It is the same equipment, and the damage has not been repaired. Only the Apollo 15 legs were worked on to lift it off the ground. Okay, back to the PLSSs. You can see the cover is removed. The only function it had was to cool the suit, just the sublimator canisters. On the left is a display model of what should be inside the PLSS. The arrows are pointing to the top, core, and the canister. When the Apollo 15 LEM was dropped during the simulated landing, equipment was damaged, and the rover was broken from its mounts. The exhaust housing was crushed, as you can see here. The lowering arms for the rover are broken on the ground, and all of the ropes are broken. The rover was damaged as well, as we'll see clearly in the next episode in this series. Note the mold growing on the sewage bag, another example of equipment being recycled for each mission and aging over time. On the lower right of this photo is more damage and broken parts. The pink foam above the legs on the flat surface between the descent and ascent modules. The astronauts in their moon suits did not have the ability to get to that location. And considering that the astronauts have not been anywhere near the LEM since landing, riding around on the rover for 2 EVAs, the activity under and around the LEM was caused by repair crews, not them. They quickly raked the soil to cover the footprints, and broken parts were thrown under the LEM, not even removed from the set. In our next episode, we'll cover the 3 Apollo missions that included lunar rovers. Did you know hidden within the thousands of photos is evidence that after the Apollo 15 rover was damaged during the simulated landing, it caused there to be 2 different-looking rovers in Apollo 16 and 3 different-looking rovers in Apollo 17. You won't want to miss this. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Hi, this is Paul on the Plane, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of Faking Space, our image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. We continue with the second half of our Faking Space series, Season 2, here, that is focusing solely on the Apollo lunar missions, Apollo 11 through 17. The NASA Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995. In 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-resolution images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. What you are experiencing here in Season 2 comes as a result of more than 10,000 hours of research poring over every photo, every video, every mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his findings with us all. Here again is a close-up of the Apollo 17 flag drying from the edges in, a stark reminder that the Apollo missions were shot right here on Earth, not the lunar surface, in which no moisture could ever be present based on how the moon is presented to us by NASA. You'll continue to see as you make your way through these Apollo videos that the evidence is there on how the equipment and the props were recycled mission after mission on the moon stage set and shot over a period of time that resulted in the obvious aging, weathering, and breaking down of many items. So let's proceed. These are the 3 Apollo 17 rovers. That's right, 3 different rovers in Apollo 17. Look closely at the right rear fender, which identifies the differences in each. The seat and floor have tools and replacement parts that were not on board the LEM. The payload specialist's main function was to reduce the weight of the vehicle, even counting every stitch in their suits to bring the weight down. There was no contingency for repairs. As a result of the crash landing in Apollo 15, which we covered in our previous episode, the rover was damaged. Note the painted rims and the damage to the rear fender. The missing fender and painted rims here. The fender has fallen off of the rover in Apollo 16 on the left. Nothing was done to fix it between the 2 mission filmings, so the astronauts mounted a map to the fender in Apollo 17 to stop the dirt from flying up at them. This is just another example of the same equipment being used for all of the missions. The Apollo 15 rover has broken down. In Apollo 16, the front steering rods have fallen down. The astronauts drove the rover backwards, as can be seen in magazine 117, from 18733 for the next 70 or more pictures. The direction of the tire tread shows that clearly. The video of this traverse shows the rover moving forward. However, that means NASA has presented the video to us in reverse. They're playing it backwards. The same rover from Apollo 15 was used in Apollo 16. The front steering broke and the only way to drive it was backwards, so the wheels castered like a shopping cart. The tire tracks confirm the direction. If they were driving back over their own tracks, the pattern would be the opposite of what is shown. Apollo 15, 16, and 17, the same rover was used. One of the features that identifies this is the oil leak in the rear axle on the left side. The LEM was dropped, remember, during the simulated landing, damaging the rover in Apollo 15. The fenders and steering are the most notable. This rover continued to have problems and breakdowns during filming. Apollo 16 has 2 rovers, and Apollo 17, apparently, at 3. They can be identified by comparing the frame rails and tire tracks. This is the second rover in Apollo 16, used only for this photo shoot, the jump salute. It is distinctive and is the only rover to have the front left fender with a double rib. All other pictures of a rover from all the missions have a single rib, like the front right fender. The upper images are of the lower frame rails of the Apollo 17 rovers. All are very different in design, just in front of the right rear wheel. 3 different tire tracks found in Apollo 17. In our next episode, Mr. Henderson and I will present photographic evidence of the staging of the lunar surface here on Earth, and evidence that some of the stagehands intentionally left clues as to the fraud. Don't you dare miss it. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Hi, this is Paul on the Plane, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of Faking Space, our image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. The second half of Faking Space Season 2 is focusing solely on the Apollo lunar missions, Apollo 11 through 17. The NASA Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995. In 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-res images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. What you are seeing here as Season 2 draws to a close comes as a result of more than 10,000 hours of research, poring over every photo, every video, every mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his findings with us all. As we've been highlighting in all of our Auditing Apollo videos, is a close-up of the Apollo 17 flag drying from the edges in, damaging evidence that the Apollo missions were shot right here on Earth, not the lunar surface in which no moisture could ever be present based on how the moon is presented to us by NASA. You'll continue to see as you make your way through the Apollo videos is evidence on how the equipment and props were recycled mission after mission on the moon stage set, and shot over a period of time that resulted in the obvious aging, weathering, and breaking down of many items. What additionally is going to be revealed over the next few videos is that the moon movies were shot in an old landfill site, evidenced by many objects that shouldn't be found on the surface of the moon. Let's proceed. While waiting for Aldrin to come down the ladder, Armstrong took this photo. On the top right is an air intake louver, and on the bottom is an air intake housing, where an air filter goes. The center bolt and washer is visible, and it has a handle on the intake horn as well. The objects on the ground are automotive in nature. Looking at the mesh of material behind Aldrin, I am surprised that they didn't trip and fall. On the bottom right there is a car alternator, and below some bent metal parts. The Surveyor is a quickly put together prop. The solar array is just a wooden board, and they are not even the same. In the lower right shows standing water, and the coating is peeling back. NASA wants you to believe that this thing navigated to the moon, descended, landed, and sent back pictures, scooped up dirt, analyzed it, and sent back data. If so, where's the high-gain antenna? NASA's Genesis rock location. It appears the interior of one rock was soft enough to be kicked apart with a boot. Inside the rock were metal parts. This broken rock revealed 2 spark plugs, a Champion, left, and an AC Delco, right. Any motor mechanic would recognize them. As discussed in our previous episode, the Rover broke down. The front steering arms were left on the ground, and beside it is a golf ball. But Apollo 14 was the only mission that claimed to feature golf balls. And this is not the only ball in Apollo 17. On close examination, there are many other golf balls present in this photo. The only reflection from the CSM should be the blackness of space. This indoor simulation of the CSM is for dramatic effect, showing the moon. However, the CSM was never in a lower orbit before the LEM. 2 doors are clearly visible, and on the right, there are 3 men in the reflection. 2 are facing to the left, and the other is facing the camera. Lighting inconsistencies are apparent as well. The EVA suits worn by the astronauts had a sunglasses pocket. All 6 missions had the same pocket. It is, however, impossible to put sunglasses on during an EVA in the vacuum of space. NASA had payload specialists to reduce the weight, and NASA claims that they were so detailed that every stitch in their suits were counted to reduce the payload, as much as possible. However, if you were faking it here on Earth, sunglasses would come in handy after taking off a helmet with a gold sunscreen in the visor. The astronauts were superstars and had to look as cool as James Dean. In our next episode, Mr. Henderson and I will present photographic evidence of the presence of moisture in many shots allegedly snapped on the surface of the moon in the vacuum of space. Don't you dare miss it. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Hi, this is Paul on the Plane, and this is Season 2, Episode 10 of Faking Space, our image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. The second half of Faking Space Season 2 focuses exclusively on the Apollo lunar missions, Apollo 11 through 17. The Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995. In 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-res images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. More than 10,000 hours of research, poring over every photo, every video, every mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings, has gone into this video series. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his evidence with us that the Apollo moon missions were shot right here on Earth. Here again is a close-up of the wet Apollo 17 flag, drying from the edges in. This isn't the only photo where moisture can be seen or found. Over the next few minutes, several other photos that were taken clearly show evidence of moisture, which was impossible if these photos were taken on the moon, which has no atmosphere, in the vacuum of space. Here we go again. The crews must have started working early in the morning, and then had to wait for the mist to clear. The astronauts were kind enough to take a couple of photos to record the event. The result of wet lunar dust. In the image on the left, astronaut Cernan has picked up a little dust turned mud, and some of it has got onto his spacesuit, especially the left arm and the glove of his suit. In the right photo, just 2 frames later, the wet lunar soil has been washed off, on the moon. To confirm this, the suit is still visibly wet on his left arm and glove. NASA claims this photo was taken in space during an undocking procedure. It is clear to see, however, that water is drying from this panel. This window was blown out during a pressure test. It was taped back in, and a rain guard, broken in this photo, was installed to try and keep the water out. NASA claims this was taken halfway to the moon. Water is running down the window in 0 gravity, and water is in between the layers of glass, which means the seal is broken. And water does not freeze on the glass, even though it's minus 250 degrees outside. Note that the water is causing the paint to peel between the layers of glass. All-sep removal from the lamp. The poor condition of this piece of equipment is unmistakable. It appears to have been exposed to water, resulting in mold growth, and consequently is very badly soiled. Remember, the equipment, we were told, was prepared under ultra-clean conditions before the mission. The deterioration of this item must be intentional to draw attention to the simulation. These two photos are examples of equipment left outside to weather. NASA is using the same props until it is in such bad shape that it has to be replaced. All of the experimental package ages over time from mission to the next. On the left is standing water and mud that is left after water has evaporated. On the right, cracks are visible, and the plastic is curling up. In our next episode, Mr. Henderson and I will present photographic evidence that the stage crew intentionally left clues for all of us to find later as they became more and more frustrated with their role in the greatest hoax ever pulled on the world. So stay tuned. Oh, and one more thing. When filming a fake moon landing, make sure when you are making observations that you appear to be enthusiastic. Just like this cuff checklist says. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Hi, Paul on the Plane again, and you are now watching Season 2, Episode 11 of Faking Space, our forensic image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. We are continuing our exposition of the faked moon landings here in the second half of Faking Space Season 2, covering NASA's Apollo 11 through 17 missions. The NASA Apollo Journal site has been available for 20 years, some parts as early as 1995, but in 2015, NASA released more than 8,400 high-res images on Flickr, claiming it was every photo taken by the astronauts during the 6 moon missions from 1969 to 1972. Here in Episode 10, we'll cover the evidence that the stagehands left clues to the fakery as they became more disgruntled with the fact that they were part of an elaborate hoax, that is, if they even knew it. Perhaps they were convinced this was all a simulation, so the little details weren't that important, and they could have a little fun, right? What you are seeing here as Season 2 draws to a close comes as a result of more than 10,000 hours of research, poring over every photo, video, mission log, everything available online relating to NASA's alleged 6 lunar landings. The tireless researcher's name is Mr. Scott Henderson, and he's been gracious enough to share his work with us all. The most damaging evidence, as we've been showing throughout this series, is the wet flag on Apollo 17. The prop was either rained on or had accumulated morning dew, much like the water on the equipment and EVA suits we provided the evidence for in our previous videos. If you think moisture or water in these photos could happen on the moon, go research what happens to water in a vacuum. Let's proceed, shall we? These 2 rocks were on the left side of the large rock, Tracy's Rock. Then in magazine 146, the rocks are on the right, and 1 photo later are missing altogether. This shows how NASA can manipulate a set. The ground on the left side of the rock has been brought back into pristine condition after the rocks were moved. Speaking of rocks, this is an example of how some of the rocks were made for the moon set. One of the features this rock has is its color, unlike the other rocks in the photos. The wire mesh is covered with a plaster-type coating. It didn't turn out well for NASA, so there's only a few of these rocks, and only in Apollo 15 do the rocks look like this. The prop rock exteriors were coated to make them appear to be real rocks. This rock was turned over to reveal how it was formed. It appears to have a lunar dust coating. The dust can be scraped away as pointed out here with the tool. A real rock would need to be split open to reveal a flat surface. Examples of how rocks were produced for the set. Remember the many automotive parts in our previous videos? They look like real rocks, but objects such as automotive parts may be found inside. The one above appears to be like an ignition coil. Note the steel band, A, wrapped around the case with square nuts, B, facing the camera. This very distinctive rock has been used in more than one mission, indicating that the same location was used to stage the Apollo moon landings. If you don't immediately recognize the distinctive folds on the corners of this rock, it's the prop C rock found in Apollo 16. Penn and Teller addressed this prop rock on one of their TV shows. No surprise, then, that it has magically reappeared in an earlier Apollo mission photograph. Perhaps we can see now why the image creators drew attention to it. GC. NASA has tried to get rid of the C prop rock, but it's not the only one with lettering on it. This bag is from a golf course. The GC on the bottom means that this is a rental golf bag. Perhaps Major Tom was using it on the moon, and then the GC would stand for ground control. This one will open NASA's eyes. I hope their eyelashes don't start falling out. The grasping tongs are carefully placed so the shadow makes an arrow. The white glove with rubber tips is at the end of the arrow. To the left of that glove are many more gloves with the fingers sticking straight out of this dirt pile. The astronauts must have had fun staging this. Easily taken to be a small rock in the background, this close-up reveals it contains what appears to be an upper part of a half-buried Labatt beer can. This Canadian Labatt label design is a very close match to the one in the 1970s photo. The LEM landing gear were built by Hero Aerospace of Quebec, Canada. The crews that worked on building and dressing these sets really were whistleblowers. A double shadow of this size would have to take some very powerful studio lighting from 2 light sources. Alternatively, these images have been retouched. It is better to have it in writing than to swear in a Bible. This BS statement is from the disgruntled employees of the Apollo 12 stage crew. We've all written in the sand or dirt before, right? In our next episode, Mr. Henderson and I will cover the Apollo 16 liftoff from the moon, an explosion that was documented well by all the photos, but for some reason, never mentioned by the astronauts themselves. You won't want to miss it. Oh, and don't forget about the cuff checklists, which were cue cards for the astronauts and director's notes. When collecting samples on the moon, don't forget to include the softball. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Hi there. This is Paul on the Plane, and welcome to the Season 2 finale of Faking Space, our image analysis series of the alleged photos we are provided by NASA and the other government space agencies. Here in Episode 12 of Season 2, we'll cover the very interesting ascent stage of Apollo 16, where the 2 astronauts were lifted back off the moon to rendezvous with the command and service module for their long trip back to Earth. Or so we are told. As always, a huge thank you to NASA Apollo Moon Mission researcher Mr. Scott Henderson and his more than 10,000 hours of work studying the photos, videos, mission logs, everything available to the public regarding the 6 Apollo lunar missions from 1969 to 1972. So let's proceed. In case you weren't aware, the back panels of the ascent stage were nearly blown off when the explosive bolts were set off that were meant to separate the Apollo 16 ascent stage from the descent stage, as seen here in this official NASA footage of the liftoff from the moon's surface. Watch closely and you can see the back panels rippling like pieces of fabric as the ascent stage rose out of sight. Here is the same video, slowed down so you can really see the panels rippling as they are nearly blown off. And finally, here is that same video again, slowed down and magnified. NASA didn't hide this fact either. Here are two photos allegedly snapped by Command Module pilot Thomas K. Mattingly II as the ascent stage prepared to rendezvous with the CSM. Clearly, the blast, if strong enough to nearly blow the panels completely off the side of the spacecraft, would have disabled the craft if it were a real takeoff. This fact alone provides damaging evidence that it was simply a staged event, and the ascent stage was lifted by cables, as there is no exhaust, just the explosive bolts going off and the side of the spacecraft being blown out. Further, there were no comments from either NASA nor the two astronauts, John Young and Charles Duke, about the explosion. They were just reading from the script. Here is the audio from the official NASA video and the mission transcript itself.
Pitchover's on time. Roger, we saw liftoff. What a ride, what a ride.
The LEM, we are told, was a very thin-skinned, lightweight machine. If it encountered any kind of explosion, especially one of this magnitude, it would have caused a rupture of the hull in the vacuum of space and resulted in a catastrophic failure. What is behind those panels, you may ask? Well, here's a photo of the lander taken prior to the mission here on Earth to show all the wiring, electrical components, and mission-critical mechanisms located directly behind the panels that were subject to this explosion. In this photo of the Apollo 16 LEM taken by one of the astronauts before liftoff, you can see the explosive pack behind the panels when magnified. This is further illustrated when you compare the Apollo 17 panels to that of the Apollo 16 version. It's clear the panels were either replaced or simply reused again after a fresh coat of paint had been applied to the ones that were nearly blown off. As we've demonstrated throughout this Apollo series, equipment was reused and recycled mission after mission on the moon stage set. I want to personally thank you for watching Season 2 of Faking Space, where we have walked through how NASA creates its CGI planets, the Himawari hoax, the iconic fake ISS image, JAXA's pathetic attempt at fooling the world, and the absolute SpaceX debacle of a Tesla Roadster in space, which I covered in the first half of this season. Thank you all for your kind words and well wishes. I've really enjoyed reading them. And finally, Mr. Scott Henderson and I would be remiss if we didn't end our Apollo hoax series here in Season 2 with the close-up of the infamous Apollo 17 flag, drying from the edges in. Evidence that the Apollo missions were shot right here on Earth, not the lunar surface in which no moisture could exist. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in Season 3. This has been Paul on the Plane. Hey there, Paul on the Plane here, and I'm excited to welcome you back to Faking Space, Hope you had a great summer and a great fall so far, and are ready to dive back into our analysis of the images and videos from the world's space agencies, exposing the evidence that space only exists in our minds. Here, as Season 3 of Faking Space begins, we'll continue where we left off in Season 2 by covering more of the mountain of inconsistencies in the Apollo space program. Special thanks again to tireless researcher Scott Henderson, who single-handedly uncovered the problems we covered in the second half of Season 2 and continue here in Season 3, after his more than 10,000 hours of examination and investigation. Season 3, Episode 1 here focuses on the Apollo program and the Van Allen radiation belts. It's not uncommon to hear many claim that NASA is talking out of both sides of its mouth when we hear we can't leave low Earth orbit, or the Orion program needs extra shielding because of the high levels of radiation. That all those claims don't seem to reconcile with what Apollo missions managed to accomplish by navigating all the way to the moon, hundreds of thousands of miles past the Van Allen radiation belts. No, NASA and those who want to support the propaganda about the moon landing missions will simply try to explain to you now that the Apollo flight trajectories allowed them to avoid the inner Van Allen radiation belt, the highly dangerous one, and the astronauts only went through the outer belt and did so very quickly by heading on a northerly path.
But the Starfish Prime radiation dissipated, and NASA eventually decided that the Van Allen radiation belts weren't enough of a hazard to ground missions to the moon. Trajectory analysts found the safest way through the region, and mission planners reasoned that the astronauts would pass through the worst of the belts fast enough that they didn't need any additional protection. All the electronics and instrumentation lining the walls of the command module would give them enough of a kind of makeshift shelter. At the end of the Apollo program, NASA found that its astronauts had not been exposed to any more radiation than the average Atomic Energy Commission worker who deals with radioactivity on a daily basis is exposed to in a year. And really, in the scope of the Apollo program, a little bit of radiation exposure was not the highest risk the astronauts ran in going to the moon.
More importantly, the course which each of the Apollo craft took avoided the most lethal parts of the inner belts completely, and they only went through the thinnest parts of the outer belt. In the end, the simple answer to why the Van Allen radiation belts were not the killer issue that some people think it was, and how the Apollo missions cut the radiation exposure for the crews to between just 1 and 5% of what it could have been, is because the Apollo missions didn't need to go straight through the Van Allen belts. They basically flew around the most deadly areas and were not in the less dangerous areas for long enough for it to be a showstopper.
So while the Van Allen belts are lethal, they could really only kill an astronaut if they were to spend several days in their radioactive vicinity. And despite the challenges the belts create when leaving Earth, we should actually be thanking them for protecting life on our planet from utter annihilation.
If you search for an image to show you the Apollo flight paths, you'll find this northerly route over and over again being illustrated. Makes sense, right? Whoops, not if you do your research. Here's the issue with the explanation that we now get from NASA and its fanboys and fangirls. When you take the time to dig into the information NASA originally produced and provided to the public, like Mr. Henderson has done, you will find this attempt to avoid the dangerous radiation was not really accounted for, and certainly not mentioned at the time. Take the Apollo press kits, for example, which are highly detailed, explaining each part of the mission and very technical in nature, and were released to the media in advance of each mission's launch. They fail, however, to mention this northern trajectory was part of the plan. It's not even in the documentation. And the illustrations of the path that the astronauts took away from the Earth all were planned to be at or near the equatorial plane, which is where we are told the deadliest parts of the radiation belts exist. Take this image from the Apollo 8 press kit, page 21. We are told that the various Apollo missions all traveled on basically the same course. The Apollo 11 press kit has a similar image on page 9. And then, when you dive in deeper, which you have to do, you find on page 34 where they describe the trajectory the spacecraft will take once it starts its translunar injection from the Earth. Parking orbit is just south of the equator in the South Pacific. Further, and potentially the nail in the coffin, at least to me, There is no mention of the Van Allen belts or the potentially high and even deadly levels of radiation in any of the mission transcripts during the time the astronauts were allegedly passing through the belts. Mission Control doesn't ask how they're doing. The astronauts don't remark about how they were feeling or how the equipment or electronics are handling these high levels of radiation for hours. Well, that's because it appears that the Van Allen radiation belt issue turned out to be something that NASA was forced to address afterward. As you can see, the original image on the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum site, a northern route was not needed to be explained until later when NASA needed to cover its tracks. Wait a damn minute, you can't change your mind on the course the astronauts took after the fact. All that extra time and fuel needed to take that course was not accounted for going into each mission. How much more fuel and time would that have required? Dig deep enough and you'll find even images like this, where the Saturn V is shown launching to the west and north and then going around the South Pole to avoid the inner Van Allen belt. As usual, inconsistencies and an extreme lack of continuity in their stories. NASA, you may want to update your propaganda for the Orion program. Your successor to Apollo claims it will take people away from Earth and through the radiation belts, but you're failing to illustrate the correct path. You will show your space fantasy crafts leaving from the equatorial plane, just like the original Apollo press kits showed. All right, thank you for watching Season 3, Episode 1 of Faking Space. In Episode 2, Mr. Scott Henderson and I will reveal multiple scene takes required to simulate the moon landings in Apollo 11, and how objects were moved or even missing from one scene to another, including the infamous flag. The only question will be whether they were intentional acts by whistleblowers. Until next time, this has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, thanks for watching. Like all of the moon missions, Apollo 11 had its share of inconsistencies, mistakes, and lack of continuity. But only if you look deeply into the images, videos, and information NASA provided to the public. Hi there, this is Paul on the Plane, and I want to welcome you to Season 3, Episode 2 of Faking Space, Apollo 11 Bloopers. Thanks to NASA moon landing researcher Scott Henderson and his more than 10,000 hours of investigation into the moon landings, this episode of Faking Space will highlight for you 5 of those blunders, starring the dynamic duo of Neil and Buzz in Apollo 11. As Neil descends the ladder to step onto the moon, the grandest achievement in all of mankind's history, mere moments away, Buzz is filming from the LEM window, and gol darn it, the lighting is just horrid. No worries, mate, just add more light, so we can all see Neil even better. It's still a little dark. Let's add some more. Never mind, Neil is completely in the shadow of the LEM, and we're told the sun provided the only light during the moon missions. But clearly you can see Neil is being lit up from a second, maybe even a third source of light. Even those of you who are thinking Buzz was had the ability to open the aperture of the camera, well, how would he know that without Houston telling him? Neil is talking to Houston at this time, and we're all waiting for Neil to utter those famous words. Yet there's never any mention in any official NASA transcripts of the need to adjust the lighting. Anyone who knows anything about the moon landings knows that the 2 astronauts climbed out of the LEM and then proceeded to deploy the U.S. flag together It was ceremonial. And it was well documented that that was the process, mission after mission. Well, funny thing, here's the picture we're told Neil took as Buzz began to descend the ladder for his very first time to step on the moon. And wouldn't you know it, if you look closely at the LEM window here, you can see something very familiar in the window's reflection. Can't quite see it? No problem. Let me increase the gamma brightness here so you can make it out better. And these two images clearly show that the flag has been deployed. However, Buzz has not come down the ladder at this point, and the video shows that both astronauts placed the flag together. Multiple takes to do each scene are very present throughout the photographic record of Apollo. More on multiple takes involving the flag later in this episode. Back to Buzz. Here's a shot Neil took of him as he continued to descend the ladder. Zoom in on the photo and something very peculiar will jump off the screen at you. One of the stagehands forgot to attach Buzz's glove to his suit. You can see the red ring where the glove is supposed to attach to the gauntlet of the suit. A close look at Buzz's gloves as he comes down the ladder, a matching pair with a dark rubberized coating and a very distinctive NVIDIA sheen, quote-unquote. On the right are the gloves for the famous photo of Man on the Moon. Lighter, not matching, and no shimmer, even in direct sunlight. Buzz cannot change gloves in the vacuum of space, and a second pair were not supplied with their spacesuits. At the top is an image of the glove and how it connects to the base of the gauntlet. However, as Buzz comes down the ladder, the red ring is visible that connects the glove and the suit. The gloves are clearly not connected to the suit, perhaps to help keep them cool during the simulated filming. Here are a couple of additional photos to show you how high up the glove attaches to the suit. I bet Buzz's arm sure got cold there in the freezing vacuum of space. Apollo 11 showing assorted items, rocks, and car parts under the LEM. Take note of these items along the shadow line on the left here. On the photo on the right, the shadow does not have anything on the ground. The set obviously has been redressed for the next photo shoot. The landing drogue has been straightened as well. To really provide some damaging evidence that multiple scene takes were conducted to get it right before the world was shown all of this footage, take a look at the footage provided to us by NASA after Neil and Buzz had ascended the ladder back into the LEM for the final time. Notice first, real quickly, the date here on the color plate, July 11, 1969. You NASA fans surely know the official dates of the Apollo 11 mission, right? Well, if not, here you go. Okay, as this version of Neil and Buzz shows, they left the flag pointing almost straight at the sun and then climbed into the LEM, launched from the surface, never to touch the moon again. But in this video, there's a different version of the same events. I want to point out a few things. First, check out the double shadow from the LEM, indicating multiple light sources. Strike one. And then as the camera pans to the right to reveal the flag, take a note of which direction the flag now is pointing. Strike two. Now the camera will pan back to the left and you'll see the double shadow again, but then they cut the video and start again, and this time the double shadow has been eliminated. Strike three. Again, keep in mind that Neil and Buzz did not get back out after ascending into the LEM, getting ready to launch and rendezvous with the command module. That's 3 strikes, NASA, and you're out. The evidence is all right here, folks, if you do the research. We hope you've enjoyed Season 3, Episode number 2 here of Faking Space. Be sure to head over to my website, paulontheplane.com, and hit the bell to be notified when the next episode of Faking Space drops. My website subs always get to see Faking Space videos first. Stay tuned, a lot more to come here in Season 3. You won't want to miss it. On behalf of Mr. Scott Henderson, this has been Paul on the Plane. Thanks for watching. Space. A void. The sheer absence of matter creating a vacuum due to a very, 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 very low pressure environment. So we're told. However, we're also told that NASA successfully landed 12 men on the moon because its spacecrafts and spacesuits were able to withstand such a low pressure environment. Hello again, this is Paul on the Plane. Welcome to episode 3 here in our third season of Faking Space and our continuing analysis of the photos, videos, and information given to us by the world space agencies, showing conclusively their stories just don't add up. In this episode, Mr. Scott Henderson and I will explore what we're told by NASA about the lack of air pressure in so-called space, and analyze whether its own equipment, such as the Apollo lunar module and the astronaut spacesuits, would actually survive. Mr. Henderson has invested more than 10,000 hours into researching the claims made by NASA as it relates to the Apollo program. So let's see if you come to the same conclusions we have. Let's start by covering a real-life example of the power of a vacuum due to one air pressure system being reduced adjacent to another air pressure system to kind of set the context here. The classic example, at least in my mind, is a railroad tanker car. You can search for and find many examples online of the structural integrity of a tanker car failing when the air pressure inside is reduced, which eventually subjects the walls of the tanker car to levels of pressure it cannot withstand on the outside of the tank, and it implodes in a thrilling fashion.
Well, there it was.
Some tanker cars are made of aluminum, some are made of steel, and they fail rather dramatically when the air pressure inside is reduced to a point where the air pressure inside the tank is not strong enough to withhold the force of the air pressure pushing against the outside of the tank. The key to grasping this is understanding what I refer to as back pressure, or the lack thereof. Let me illustrate further. In an episode of the popular science show, Mythbusters, Adam and Jamie collapsed a steel train tanker car by lowering the air pressure inside the tank down to 3.4 pounds per square inch, or psi, meaning they had increased the outside pressure pushing against the walls of the tanker to 11.3 psi, which equates to about 1,600 pounds per square foot of external pressure over the entire outside of the tank. Now, those numbers are derived from the fact that at sea level, we experience approximately 14.7 psi. So before some of the air was vacuumed out of the tanker car, there was approximately 14.7 psi pushing on both the inside and the outside of the tank. But as the air pressure was reduced inside to 3.4 psi, about a 75% vacuum, that meant there was a difference, or negative pressure as some call it, of 11.3 pounds per square inch, which equates to more than 8 tons per square meter crushing into the tank externally on all sides, and it simply could not withstand it. And bam! Did you know that 14.7 psi equates to approximately 10 tons of force for every square meter? But, you may ask, how do we survive as humans with such a force applied externally to our bodies in all directions? Well, it's simple. There's 14.7 psi of back pressure too, a perfect state of equilibrium. And this is the important point. Now, let's go to so-called space and apply these concepts that are observable, testable, repeatable here on Earth. When we talk in terms of space, the most common scale used is torr, and it's expressed as 10 to a negative number, meaning there are a bunch of zeros after the decimal point before you get to the numbers. At sea level, 14.7 psi equates to 760 torr. And if you could achieve a perfect vacuum, which is not attainable, 100% vacuum, it would be considered 0 psi. Now bear with me here, as it's important to understand the conversion from psi to torr, and then back again to put it in terms that we are accustomed to, in order to fully understand how strong the negative pressure would be in space. That again is if space exists as we are told it is. To crush the tanker car, the air pressure was reduced from 760 torr to 176 torr. That is 14.7 psi down to 3.4 psi inside the tank. The Kármán line, as it is called, is considered to be the boundary into outer space from Earth, and it exists at approximately 62 miles or 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. At this altitude, we are told the air pressure is 10 to the negative 3 torr. That equals just 0.000002 psi. Up to the Kármán line, the environment there is classified as a quote-unquote low vacuum. So, if we were in a capsule of sorts at 62 miles above the surface of the Earth, we are told that the air pressure being applied to the outside of the capsule is down to just 0.000002 psi. But the pressure inside the capsule, if we took off from sea level, like most rockets do, would again be 10 tons per square meter. How do you think the capsule we are in would be able to withstand 10 tons of pressure per square meter on the inside of the capsule walls trying to get out with just 0.000002 psi of back pressure? Do you see where I'm going with this? And this is only at 62 miles above the Earth. From 10 to the negative 3 torr to 10 to the negative 9 torr is classified as a quote-unquote high vacuum. And the scale is not linear, it's exponential or even logarithmic. The largest and most powerful vacuum chamber in the world is located at NASA's Glenn Research Center in Sandusky, Ohio. According to NASA, their massive vacuum chamber has the capability to reduce the air pressure down to 10 to the negative 6 torr, which is 1,000 times stronger of a vacuum than 10 to the minus 3 torr at the Kármán line. And it takes many hours to pump the air out to get down to 10 to the negative 6 torr, and the facility has 6 to 8 foot concrete walls reinforced with a leak-proof steel containment barrier built in so that the concrete dust and no air can be sucked through the walls and into the chamber itself and ruin the vacuum they are trying to create. If you were able to reduce the air pressure further inside a chamber, then you are getting into the quote-unquote ultra-high vacuum classification. This is 10 to the negative 9 torr and above, which is approaching the level of vacuum we are told exists on the surface of the moon, which is an astonishing 10 to the negative 11 torr, which is the numbers 100 million times stronger of a vacuum than the Kármán line. Now, those numbers were given, but perhaps those are just estimates, since we've never been there and can't simulate that here on Earth. Some interesting notes about the Glenn Research Facility, which we are told is able to simulate 10 to the minus 6 torr, still 100,000 times weaker than the surface of the moon, was built in 1969, the same year Apollo 11 allegedly achieved putting 2 men on the surface of the moon. But if you really dig to find out when the world's largest vacuum chamber was first opened, you'll find out it was actually in October 1969, 3 months after Neil and Buzz allegedly walked on the moon. And even then, we are told the vacuum on the surface of the moon is 100,000 times stronger than what even NASA's best vacuum chamber could achieve. Once you reach even the quote-unquote high vacuum classification, this is what we are told the Glenn Research Facility can achieve, 10 to the negative 6 torr. You need vacuum seals like these, On the left, which are metal and comprised of one-time use materials. They are needed to seal in a high vacuum area. On the right are the helmets seals of the Apollo missions. The latch fits in the groove for easy installation. The connection does not have the capability to compress the seal and logically would not function even in a low vacuum. The gloves of the spacesuits have a similar type for an easy connection. The surface of the seals must also be virtually perfectly clean and free of foreign materials for the seal to even be effective, or it will fail under such a low-pressure environment. The Apollo astronauts using the same suits covered in dirt for 3 EVAs, it would be impossible for the suits to work and reseal multiple times. The same is true for the hatch for the lunar module, as they had to crawl through, dragging dust and dirt with them. The door seals would not be functional. The LEM could not be pressurized after re-entry. In this image here on the left are examples of seals used to, again, contain a vacuum. On the right is Neil Armstrong's glove. The connection that holds the glove to the suit are just like a door latch that pushes out into a channel. They do not compress the seal between the metal. This design is for an easier way of putting the suit on and off during practice, and of course, simulations. This connection, however, would not even hold a small amount of pressure. The fact that the LEM did not have an airlock means that any container within the craft had to be designed to withstand the vacuum of space, which we are told, again, was 10 to the negative 11 torr. This is a complete error in simulation, NASA. The food pouches would explode as the aircraft depressurized, as well as the urine bags and feces in the jettison bag. Any other containers within the craft for air or for water would be subjected to the vacuum of space and would suffer the same consequences, and probably pretty dramatically. Here is a typical NASA fanboy or fangirl explanation, however, of why the ultra-high vacuum of space isn't a big deal. That when you walk out into space in your spacesuit, it will want to expand, but how strong is that pressure? It's only 1 atmosphere, so not that strong. They're specifically designed to keep the suit from ballooning out. And that, folks, is where the deception lies. This is the type of statement that NASA gives when describing the vacuum of space. NASA tells us that the air pressure on the surface of the moon is 10 to the negative 11 torr, however. And this equates to nearly negative 2 billion psi, because there is almost no back pressure at all. Not the 14 psi you will see in the comments of many videos on this subject. Do the conversion yourself, people. 10 to the negative 11 torr equates to negative pressure of 131 million atmospheres. To further illustrate this point, I corresponded with a company who specializes in vacuum lifting after seeing one of their promo videos. The representative who emailed me back stated that they can achieve 25 tons of lift by creating roughly an 80% vacuum, 165 torr, between their lifting pads and the massive pipe here as an example. That is near the level of vacuum achieved that collapses train tanker cars. That negative pressure uses the fact that the air outside of the pipe, especially underneath it, is pushing or pulling so hard in an attempt to get into the little space between the lifter and the pipe that it can achieve 25 tons of lift. Are you starting to understand the amount of force that the inside of the spacesuits and spacecrafts that NASA built would have to withstand to maintain integrity? One final point. Have you heard of the Apollo rock box? It's an aluminum case that the rock samples the Apollo astronauts collected on the moon were stored in for the trip home and to be opened here on Earth. We are told that the lunar atmosphere was preserved inside this aluminum box. Again, 10 to the negative 11 torr. I guess these rock boxes are stronger than steel tanker cars and stronger than the Glenn Research Facility walls by hundreds of thousands of times. And if you think the lunar module, made of a few layers of aluminum, is stronger than the Glenn Research Center vacuum chamber, and if you think the Apollo spacesuits remain flexible at 10 to the negative 11 torr and is stronger than this building, 100,000 times stronger it would have to be, then you've been successfully indoctrinated. The only thing NASA has sent to space, people, is your imagination. On behalf of Scott Henderson, this has been Paul on the Plane. Thanks for watching.
We can do this, and we need to do this because this is it. This is it, okay? This is it. There are probably lots of other nice planets out there that we're going to find, but they're going to be really far away and out of reach. We can't even go to the moon, for God's sake. This is it. So let's deal with this one first before we start thinking we can go running off somewhere else.
Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Faking Space, now in its 3rd season. This is Paul on the Plane, and moon landing researcher Scott Henderson and I continue to examine very closely the photographs that were handed down by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA for short, from the Apollo program that they claim successfully launched 12 men to the moon's surface and returned them safely back to Earth in the late 1960s into the early 1970s through the most hostile environment known to humanity. We hope you've enjoyed the first 3 episodes here in Season 3, as we've been diving deeply into how NASA has changed its story about the astronauts' trajectory through and then around the Van Allen radiation belts, the extensive blooper reel starring Neil and Buzz from the Apollo 11 mission, and our latest installment, which provided a thorough breakdown of what the purported lack of air pressure on the moon would actually mean for the lunar module and the astronaut spacesuits. In this installment, we'll continue with our analysis of the spacesuits themselves and provide evidence that the spacesuits we were shown by NASA would not survive a trip into low Earth orbit, let alone a 500,000-mile trip away from and then back to the friendly confines of Earth's atmosphere. So, let's begin. First, many have doubted for 50 years now how those white, fluffy, but bulky-looking spacesuits we are also familiar with could withstand such a low-pressure environment and not become immediately rigid and render the astronauts completely immobile. But we must be careful when touting that whole idea as proof that the spacesuits wouldn't work, as advertised, because NASA claims to have figured that out long before astronauts allegedly stepped foot on the moon. You see, according to NASA, the astronauts actually donned 2 spacesuits, a pressurized inner suit, as seen here, which was beneath the unpressurized outer white one. So don't be quick to claim the outer white suit would balloon up as the air pressure was reduced, because, as the story goes, that part of the spacesuit wasn't even pressurized. We are told this inner pressurized spacesuit, which would still, even to this day, have to be considered a modern marvel of technology, was airtight, mostly made of neoprene, and was contained within a layer of embedded mesh-like material to keep it from expanding. Kind of like a balloon inside a bag of netting, only allowing the balloon to expand so far. Further, we're told the fingers, shoulders, knees, and elbows of this inner pressurized suit had accordion-like joints that allowed flexing without ballooning. Truly a technological masterpiece. The outer layer, the white, unpressurized suit, was made of fireproof, abrasion-resistant material, we are told, which was designed to provide thermal insulation and protection against micrometeors, but only works in a vacuum. So, case closed, right? Not so fast. When you start to closely examine the photographs and employ some basic common sense, as usual, NASA's story just doesn't add up. And here's why. If the white outer suit wasn't pressurized and was designed only to serve as a thermal outer layer, then why do the gloves and helmet attach directly to this unpressurized suit? This is Neil Armstrong's suit as displayed by NASA as his complete kit. The suit flown in Apollo 11 for the claimed moon landings. It has been on display for many years and has been restored and cleaned in an attempt to keep it from decay and as a permanent record of the claimed event. The International Latex Corporation was contracted to make the suits. NASA's updated files claim that it has 21 layers of protection. Interesting that none are listed as a protection against radiation, however, but I digress. Here's another attempt to show the updated movements of the astronauts in their suits. The image on the left is from the Apollo 11 press kit. On the right is an image of the alleged pressurized suit. However, it's not pressurized in this photo, and is certainly not in a vacuum chamber. It's clear to see that the suit in the previous frame is not incorporated into this suit. This is a costume for simulation only and does not have the seals required to pressurize. On the top left, the ring is not sealed to the suit and the zipper does not go all the way up. And the zipper would not seal and hold any air pressure. The seals and connections of the helmet and gloves do not compress and have a door latch tongue design for a quick attachment. The suit is done up using zippers, poppers or snaps, and Velcro. This would not seal. The zipper does not go all the way up, would not even hold a small amount of pressure. Again, these suits were designed to put on and off easily for simulation purposes and media events only. There is not a pressure suit inside. Even if the inner pressurized suit NASA claims the astronauts wore under the outer unpressurized suits, even if it was incorporated into or between the white abrasion layers, it still wouldn't seal because of the snaps and zipper connections. The connection rings on the glove and the suit are clearly not connected. The band on the suit is visible and the ring is just below it. The gap between the rings are about 3 inches apart. The ring on the glove is behind the watch. And the rings themselves are quick connect and cannot seal in the vacuum of space or even underwater. The suit is a staged costume used for practice and simulations. The images here are from Buzz descending the ladder from the Apollo simulation photos, numbered here. It is very clear the gloves are not attached and of course cannot be in a vacuum. It is clear to see here that the connections are attached to this garment, and not to the claimed pressurized suit, as there isn't one underneath or incorporated in. The connections shown here are not sealed properly to withstand the vacuum of space. On the left is a food port attached to the bubble helmet, but as you can see, the seal cannot be compressed as what would be required, and the inside air pressure would push the cover out and away from the seal. It cannot be used in a vacuum, so the only reason it must be there is to give the astronauts a drink using a straw during practice or simulations. On the above left are 4 photos of high vacuum seals, metal, and one-time use materials. These are needed to seal in a high and ultra-high vacuum areas, of which the moon, we are told, was a ultra-high vacuum area at 1 × 10⁻11 torr. On the right are the helmet seals of the Apollo missions. The latch fits in the groove for easy installation. This connection does not have the capability to compress the seal and would not function even in a low vacuum. The gloves have a similar type for an easy connection. The surfaces must be clean and free of foreign materials for the seal to be effective. The Apollo astronauts using the same suits covered in dirt for 3 EVAs, it would be impossible for the suits to work and reseal each time. The same is true for the hatch for the LEM, as they had to crawl through, dragging dust and dirt with them. The door seals would not function. The LEM could not be repressurized after re-entry. And the fact remains. The helmet and gloves clearly were attached to the outer white, non-pressurized suit. Even if the connections to the helmet and gloves were able to withstand an ultra-high vacuum environment, the outer white suit would have to be pressurized, which is in direct conflict with NASA's claims. Someone is lying. This has been Paul on the Plane. On behalf of Scott Henderson, thanks for watching.